The secret of Medusa is hidden in the moon. Remember her? She's the lady with the snakes for hair. Far in the west, as Greek mythology tells us, beyond the ocean, dwelt a terrible monster born of the sea deities Phorco and Ceto. This monster was called Gorgo the Medusa and was mortal and had two immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryalus. Gorgo, who always wore black clothes, had wings and could fly quickly through the ethers. Her face was round and always angry. Her mouth was wide open and her eyes were wide, and she had snakes instead of hair, huge boar teeth, a tiled nose and tongue that stuck out. Anyone who saw this horrible face or met her gaze was literally petrified of fear. Medusa was beheaded by Perseus with the help of Athena and Hermes, and even then, however, the sight of the severed head was enough to petrify the beholder. Athena, the goddess who, according to another myth, killed Gorgo during the Battle of the Giants, helped Perseus by first leading him to the city of Dicterion in Samos, the island of Samos, and showed him the three mermaids in illustration so that he could distinguish Medusa from her immortal sisters. When he then, Athena warned him never to look at Medusa's face, not face to face, but only in the mirage, and gave him a well-polished shield, that is to use as a mirror. For this reason, after his return to Seriphos, Perseus gave the head of the monster Medusa to the goddess of Athena, the goddess of knowledge and wisdom, who fixed it under her auspices. The myth, with its various local variations, became very popular. Throughout ancient Greece, Gorgo's mask, that is, the Medusa face, appeared as a deterrent. In the market of Argos, near the sanctuary of Kiphisos, there was an old stone Gorgo Medusa looking, which was characterized as the work of a cyclops. Pausanias B27 states, it also belonged to the 8th century. Clay masks, whose shape resembles a vase with wild tusks, from the sanctuary of Hera in Tiryns. The main feature of this terrible mask of Medusa was the wild eye that had the power to drive away evil and the profane. But what is the deeper meaning behind this myth? What does Medusa symbolize, as well as the feeling of petrification she evoked? Robert Graves, in Greek myths, reported that the priestesses of the triple goddess wore protective masks with wild fiery eyes and a tongue sticking out from beneath the teeth to frighten outsiders and keep them away from their mysteries. The triple goddess, a term denoting the matriarchal religion of the moon, is associated with fertility and the cycle of birth, growth, and death. The names of the mermaids are the names of the moon goddess. The Orphics called the face of the moon Mermaid's Head, and Preller sees in the round face head of Medusa the moon herself. From these alone, the close relationship of the three mermaids with the moon is demonstrated, but there are also some other indirect references. For example, the Medusa has the Gorgonian Medusa has been found on a triskelion form of a coin of Syracuse. The triskelion is a lunar symbol and symbolizes the three aspects of the moon that follow each other. On another coin of Megara, three crescents are represented in the shape of triskelion, and on the other hand, the all-black clothes that envelop Medusa's all-round face are believed to be the darkness of night that surrounds the moon. Even the boar is an animal dedicated to the lunar deity, and the reason is that its tusks form a crescent moon. That Medusa had boar's teeth is another indication of the lunar nature. But why does the moon, the full moon, can and does take on such a terrifying aspect? What does the disk of the night that petrifies mortals with terror symbolize? In his book, Genesis Against the Ancient Hellenes, Apostolos Gonidalis mentions that The name of Medusa is derived from the verb medo, which means to rule, and to protect. And Medeon or Medeos was the protector, the guardian, the ruler. So Medusa, the author concludes, means the queen, the protector, the one who was appointed to guard something. But what was Medusa protecting? What kind of mystery was she a keeper of? It's known that in all countries, cultures, the full moon is connected with the mysteries of love and reproduction. Even today, all over the world, lovers feel the influence of the full moon. But is it possible that the very form of Eros is associated with the appearance of Medusa and causes such unspeakable terror? The myth of Gorgas Medusa has long become a model of psychoanalytic interpretation of myths. Freud himself, in 1922, associated the hideous head of the Medusa with the maternal vulva, and the sight of which he freezes the young man petrifies, but perhaps the correlation is much deeper. According to another philosopher, Bergson, the psyche of man is in continuous contact with everything that happens every moment in the entire universe. In theory, we could experience the world through the experiences of every human being, every living being that exists. But to feel the reality through the eyes of anyone else means to accept not only the moments of happiness, but also all the sorrows, pains, and separations that he felt. To unite with the universe is to feel the pain and death of countless beings. Such a thing would be a crushing experience for a human. Shattering its structure just as a cosmogenic storm shatters the shell of an egg. So the brain, according to Bergson, is nothing more than a guarding mechanism, the valve that filters external events, allowing to reach consciousness only those elements that are necessary for our survival. The mind's role is to guard the gates of perception and reject all that does not fit into the patterned world of convention it has constructed. The experience of love represents for the mechanism of the mind a great danger. During the love experience of the mechanisms of insecurity and mistrust relax, and the lover begins to immerse herself in the experience of the partner. Through a constant effort of rapprochement and mental alignment, each person begins to see the world through the eyes of the other. This enriches the consciousness, but at the same time, it begins to abolish the boundaries between I and you, between the subject and the object. The structured world of convention, full of bounded objects and events, begins to lose its boundaries. Everything seems to merge together. The boundaries become blurred, and the sense of isolated self is replaced by a wider sense of reality defined by the term we. This experience is essentially what Plato describes as stages of erotic mystagogy in the Symposium. Such an experience is compounded, as we have already mentioned, by a sense of loss of self. As a natural result of this feeling, the relief and sense of freedom is accompanied by a primal fear, as the walls that isolate yet protect begin to erode. All these years, despite the sense of suffocation and loneliness, the isolated entity felt protected within the confines of the dead mental reality. Now she suddenly finds herself defenseless before the fiery breath of life in the swirling vortex that plunges her into mystery. Everything around seems to come to life, and their dangerousness scares her. Ronald Lang, in his book Split Self, refers to the sense of precipitation and internal collapse that is expressed in the terror that one experiences, and the world will momentarily collapse inside him and eliminate all his identity, like a gas obliterating the void. Like a gas obliterates the void. Any contact with the dangerous reality of love is experienced by the mind as a terrible threat and associated with the terror of absorption and intrusion. The ancients knew that an erotic philosophy is not just an idiosyncratic intellectual interpretation of the universe, but implies and entails the whole world full of representations, experiences, and possibilities. An erotic philosophy means mental openness to everything that exists in the world, meaning a greater possibility of communication with any life forms or dimensions that, within the limits of today's social reality, remain sealed due to our mental shields. Real wisdom means being able to expand the boundaries of consciousness more and more into the mystery that surrounds us. But this presupposes acceptance of more and more emotional experience that we are constantly discovering. The whole process is neither automatic nor easy. In order for a person to connect with anything else, it's required that they have a solid sense of their autonomous identity. Otherwise, any relationship threatens to rob him of his sense of self. The person is afraid to delve into the world of the heart, and this is because the uncertainty he feels about the stability of his autonomy causes a fear of annihilation and losing himself. In front of this terror of chaos, the goddess Athena represents the world of the intellect and the mind. It is she who maintains order, the boundaries of convention that make up the human dimension. It is no coincidence that the goddess of wisdom protects and supports heroes who base their existence on the intellect, such as Ulysses, for example. According to Walter Burkert, Athena's sphere of influence is the power of culture, organizational wisdom. Even in war, Athena does not represent the wild urge, but the military discipline. Athena's emblem and weapon is the aegis. When she raises the aegis, that is her shield, her enemies panic and they are immediately destroyed. In Tegea, in fact, the temple of Athena, they show some hairs from the head of the mermaid Medusa, which Athena herself had given as a talisman for the city. In other words, the goddess Athena on her shield had the head of the mermaid Medusa with a snake head. So what is the relationship of the mind with the fear that love causes? According to myth, the three mermaids named Steno, Euryalus, and Medusa were originally beautiful maidens who lived in Libya, but one night Medusa lay down with Poseidon in front of one of Athena's temples. The goddess was enraged at the blasphemy and turned Medusa into an ugly winged monster, but the myth contains a deeper meaning. Just as Athena transforms a fair daughter into a deformed monster with wild eyes, bronze hands, and snake scales, so the mind perceives the experience of consummated amorous intercourse as a nightmare. This is also the content of the mystery teaching of love. The greatest fear for a sense of personal identity is the destruction of protective boundaries. The form of Medusa, the primordial fear, is associated with the aspect of love. For the uninitiated, it's the great test that sooner or later each of us is called to face. A sudden intense fear makes us freeze in place. Similarly, a persistent phobia petrifies every emotion, petrifies the inner life. With the term petrification, we can therefore describe a special form of terror from which someone turns into a column of salt, into stone. After all, the well-known phrase, frozen with his fear, comes from this experience. Similarly, in the same term, we can also include the fear of something like this happening, that is, the fear of changing from a living person into an inanimate object, into stone, a robot, an automation without personal autonomy of action, into a thing without subjectivity. To these two concepts, psychiatrist Ronald Lang adds the third: the magical act by which one can turn another into stone, by extension, the act by which one denies the other's autonomy, ignores their feelings, considers them as a thing, murders every life in them. From the studies of psychology, it's clear that the person who is consumed by phobias uses a basic mechanism to maintain his safety. This mechanism is an internal mental Medusa head that turns towards the other and by extension towards the dangerousness of the outside world. This concept can also be extended to the secular level. Under the influence of fear, the mind, through criticism and the mechanisms of depersonalization, petrifies everything around it. Thus, the ontological insecurity inherent in every human being turns the universe into a pile of dead objects, thereby depriving it of the ability to harm it. This is something that the respective authorities know very well, of course. The acceptance of, for example, a mechanistic world is described by the scientific theories of the Enlightenment becomes possible only for those people whose ontological insecurity has replaced the sense of romantic fullness. A person who perceives the universe as animate could not embrace the doctrines that the struggling web of innumerable existences are inanimate particles, clockwork, the heaps of stone. His senses must first be dulled, his mind filled with phobias, and his heart closed to any form of contact. Supporting the theories of scientific necrophilia is therefore inextricably linked to the imposition of fear. On a deeper metaphysical level, the whole matter is rooted in a broader theory, the theory of the cosmic opposition between the archetypes of love and fear. According to this theory, Eros and Phobos, Eros meaning lust and Phobos meaning fear, are the two opposite poles of existence that we simply call the root of evil and good. Love represents the creative power of the universe, the principle of fertility, and universal life. On the contrary, fear leads to the destruction of everything that exists to the point of absolute annihilation. Each of the two principles transforms into the other, so the more the more fear we have, the less power and potential of love. The more trust, love, and conscious identification grows, the less insecurities. If now we draw a straight line representing the evolutionary course, then at one end of this straight line is the divine absolute, with which the archetype of love is identified. On the other side, the dark power of fear that, like a black hole, absorbs and annihilates everything. Every being that is born is at a point on this ideal line between two poles, as close as it gets. Towards the end of Eros, the more sophisticated it is. On the contrary, the more the soul is immersed in insecurities and phobias, the deeper the soul is in the void of primal terror. The path can be towards either side and requires our participation and intention. A healthy society is one that turns fear into love. Within its framework, the role of every existence is to psychologically transform insecurities and phobias into trust and a sense of security. Instead, an oppressive society tries to destroy love in people's consciousness and strengthen their insecurities. In the great journey of initiation, each person faces the face of Medusa. For some, it is the ultimate fear, for others, the gateway to eternity. Behind her, the great goddess awaits the chosen initiates to lead them into the mysteries of birth, death, and rebirth. The snake that stirs Medusa's hair, now known that by changing their skin they will remain young forever. They know that consciousness evolves like the cycles of the moon through an eternal spiral of reversion, ceaselessly transforming fear with a tide of love. The snakes, whispering the secrets of the ancestors, drag us towards the opening formed in the mouth of the Medusa, behind the sharp teeth of the boar, into the maelstrom that leads to a shining and beyond bounds eternity. This is the basis of Arcadian philosophy, and this is also the beginning of our cycle. And this I've translated for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.